This video is the last of the Putin trilogy, following on from Vlada's consolidation through to his frustration and stagnation up to the present-ish day. Let's jump in. Shall we? Yes.
Темная ночь, только пули свистят по степи, только ветер гудит провода, тускло звезды мерцают. Темную ночь, ты, любимая, знаю.
Putin had to give up the presidency in May of 2008 so as not to violate the Russian constitution. In reality, he remained in control and just swapped the places of president and prime minister with Dmitry Medvedev. One of the last things Putin did as president was prepare for war with Georgia. Georgia had declared independence in 1991 when the USSR fell apart. Since then, it has been at loggerheads with Russia. Georgia itself, home to various ethnicities, faced lots of internal strife, with certain regions wanting independence from Georgia. In the 90s and 2000s, ethnic violence and displacement was very common, especially in Abkhazia. From about 1990 to 2003, Abkhazia had reduced its total population by more than half, thanks to ethnic cleansing of Georgians. In 2002, Russia began issuing Russian passports to people in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Sometimes called passportization, this was part of a plan to eventually claim Russian sovereignty of these two regions. If most people in those places held Russian passports, surely those places belonged to Russia. That wasn't their only method of forcing the situation, however. By 2008, Russia provided South Ossetia with the majority of its funding. Local leaders were propped up by the Russian government, and Russian intelligence meddling ran deep across those regions, and really all of Georgia. Putin wanted Abkhazia and South Ossetia for a number of reasons. Abkhazia offered a tighter grip on the Black Sea, and South Ossetia would provide a geographical stumbling block right in the middle of Georgia. But I think what Putin really wanted to achieve is the prevention of Georgia becoming a member of NATO. Georgia voted on whether to join NATO in a non-binding referendum in January 2008. The vote was 77% yes. This was seen by Putin as a major existential threat, or at least a threat to his own pride. If Georgia joined NATO, he would have a rival bloc member right on his border, other than Estonia and Latvia, and Russia would never be able to interfere with Georgia again without risking a very big, very explodey war. So, in August 2008, the Russo-Georgian War began. It lasted 12 days. Perhaps less than 1,000 people were killed, but around 200,000 were displaced. On the 25th of August, Russia recognized South Ossetia and Abkhazia as independent states, although in reality they were clients of Russia and would in the following years host Russian military bases as if they were a part of it. Georgia did not join NATO. Russia was then hit with the world financial crisis, and in 2009 the Federation suffered a biting recession. GDP that year fell 8%. Dealing with this took up a lot of Medvedev's political capital. His election platform was largely based on anti-corruption measures that really didn't materialize into anything significant. At the beginning of 2010, Medvedev split the Southern Federal District and created the North Caucasus district. Essentially, this was to isolate the troublesome Chechen and Dagestan republics, and perhaps to create a more specialized federal district along the Georgian border. Medvedev was really just holding Putin's robe, and much of his presidency was spent waiting to hand it back to Daddy. Putin won the 2012 election for president, again, neither free nor fair, and under new rules entitling him to a 6-year term instead of 4. Anti-Putin hopes and protests were crushed. Putin's first action was to issue 14 decrees broadly addressing a number of socio-economic topics in Russia. Putin ordered that all Russians would have access to new housing every 15 years, that by 2018 wages would have gone up by 40%, that the court system would become independent, as it was always meant to be. Why did he make such promises that he really couldn't keep, even if he wanted to? Well, as I said, it seems to me that Putin had the Russian establishment and political class under his thumb early. There are a finite amount of players in a political system, and if you're motivated, you can probably compromise and terrify all of them. The people were still a problem, though. If there is hope, it lies in the proles. So Putin began passing laws that increased surveillance and censorship powers. Russian official discourse began to describe protests as abuse of democratic freedoms. Homophobia was codified into Russian law, and Putin blamed homosexuality for a litany of domestic problems. Classic scapegoating. When the European Commission said that it would investigate Russian oil giant Gazprom, Putin signed into law a decree preventing state-owned entities from cooperating with foreign authorities without government permission. He made it illegal to question the integrity of the Russian nation, essentially to say anything the government didn't like. Democracy in Russia had long been dead, but now too was anything close to freedom. Now to Ukraine. Viktor Yanukovych was the country's 9th and 12th prime minister and was politically close to Russia. He tried and failed to become the president in 2004, but in 2010 he succeeded. The Kiev Post said the elections were fixed. It didn't matter. It was too late. Yanukovych began jailing political opponents and rounding off the edges of free, real journalism. He strongly favored the Donbass region in Ukraine's east, with half of his appointed ministers from there. In 2013, almost half of all the money spent on socio-economic development in the country was spent in just 2 areas, Donetsk and Luhansk. These areas had far greater numbers of ethnic Russians than anywhere else in the country. It seemed that, like Putin, Yanukovych desired his own little autocracy as a good friend or client state of Russia. But unlike Putin, he didn't have the time to lay sufficient groundwork or the political chops to do it. By most accounts, he was incredibly corrupt, siphoning tens of billions from his own people and into his and his family's back pockets. In November of 2013, Yanukovych said that he would not sign an agreement with the EU on political association and free trade. This came as a shock to many normal Ukrainians. It seemed obvious that cooperating with the EU, which may have many problems, but is at least not ruled by a ruthless murderer, was preferable to bending to Russia. Protests turned to riots, and then as the police began killing those who rose up, it turned into an all-out rebellion. Anti-protest laws came into effect. the government authorized police to use live ammunition against protesters, but the rebellion continued, enraged. On the 21st of February, Yanukovych, accompanied, or rather led, by Russian soldiers, fled Kiev and then all of Ukraine for Russia. Putin, who sought to do with Ukraine what he had done to Georgia, prevent it from joining NATO and intimidate it into neutrality, almost immediately began an undeclared war on Ukraine. Unmarked Russian soldiers seized control of Crimea's local parliament on the 27th of February. On the 17th of March, Russia formally recognized Crimea as an independent state. That lasted 4 days. On the 21st, it became a Russian federal state. This, I think, was Putin's biggest mistake. The invasion and annexation were the result of a decision made hastily in response to Yanukovych's ousting, and I suspect with the ultimate goal of preventing Ukraine from either joining NATO or cooperating with it in a way where it would forever be out of the Kremlin's sphere of influence. But although it may have had the desired effect of destabilizing Ukraine, it destabilized and isolated Russia. The Russo-Ukrainian War started in February 2014, and as of this video, it is ongoing. That's a little over 8 years. International sanctions and a brief collapse in oil prices caused a financial crisis in Russia. This is the annual GDP growth in Russia, and this is the rate of inflation. In 2014, Gazprom's net income dropped by 86%. Russia's export value peaked in 2013 and has never recovered. From 2014 onward, it seems that Putin's decision-making, although just as ruthless, became far more emotional than logical. In 2015, Putin intervened in the Syrian civil war, backing the Syrian government. In 2016, he interfered with the US presidential election, according to, amongst others, the CIA. It's difficult to say how meaningful this interference actually was. Putin has since said that he doesn't care who the US president is, that presidents come and go. So why do it then? My own theory is that Putin had grown bored in the years leading up to this, that he faced little threat to his dictatorship, but that Russia's diminished place on the world stage and that a perceived lack of international respect drove him to project strength. It's difficult to ascertain how popular Putin really is, what with the death squads and all. In 2017, the Moscow-based Levada Center said 67% of Russians held Putin personally responsible for high-level corruption, and they are surely right. The corruption does not exist because Putin can't stop it. It's an important part of his kingdom. Over the last decade, working Russians have trickled out of the country in search of better lives, to the point where Russia's working population is set to decrease by about 7 million over the next decade. With the 2018 jailing of outspoken critic and political opponent Alexei Navalny, it is clear, if not already very clear, Putin has no interest in a Russia without Putin. How petty could a dictator be, other than to turn away from international cooperation and prosperity, because then he wouldn't be the center of it all? Well, in 2021, Putin was named Russia's most handsome man. Yeah, my president ain't no hobbit. In early 2022, Putin demanded that NATO and Ukraine sign a legally binding agreement stating that Ukraine would never join NATO. On the 21st of February, Russia recognized the Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Ukraine as independent republics, and on the 24th, Putin authorized the ground invasion of the rest of Ukraine and the escalation of his 8-year war. His stated war goal was to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine, which is a bit like a naked person walking into a public place and shouting that the naked people should leave. Really, no matter what he says, it's really about keeping Ukraine out of NATO and away from the sphere of anyone who isn't Putin. That war is going on now, did you know? It has caused a massive refugee crisis and has shown the world Putin's disregard for all human life, the innocent people of Ukraine, and indeed his own soldiers. But after a soggy start, even if Russia wins, if winning has any meaning, the people of Russia will see no benefit. Drastic sanctions have severely isolated Russia and tanked its economy, perhaps not enough so Putin leaving the presidency in 2024 to become the shadow president again will put him in any jeopardy, but you never know. All of what Putin does is to ensure his own position, enrich himself, and make himself feel better about being the dictator of a failed state, a state that has failed because of him. Vladimir is no doubt a war criminal, no doubt an enemy of the people of Chechnya, no doubt an enemy of the people of Ukraine, but he is also an enemy of Russia. He has terrorized the Russian people for 20 years, and he has stood in the way of his nation's progress for his own benefit. He is many things, but he is also a traitor. I don't think he has ever done anything solely for his country, and certainly never anything for Russia that would in any way hinder him. A war crime is a war crime, a murder is a murder. But when he does these things not for any people, or state, or idea, but because it is better to reign in hell, well, you know. I mean, at least Hitler believed in the crazy shit he said. I made this video at the end of March 2022. I don't know what's going to happen to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, or to Putin. It looks like a big shambles. One day, somehow, Putin will no longer be the president or the leader in any way of Russia. And that day will be as dangerous as it is satisfying. That's it. That's the video. Thanks very much for watching. I'm moving because there's a borscht van outside of my home. Just pretend like we're talking. It's been there for about a week. So I may be absent from YouTube for a couple of weeks. Perhaps more if the airburst is particularly big. I hope not though. But I will see you as soon as I can be bothered. Cheers. Ta-ra. No. No.
If, however, you have had a body in the house for more than 5 days,
of cocktails.
This station will not be broadcasting news and information for your area until further notice.